let's finish this thing up already. It's been sitting here for a while. So this is the power distribution, or not distribution, but more of a power brick for the battery connectors. The biggest issue we've had is we have 4 of these packs. They have 10 gauge wire, and you know, I mean, it's you have an obvious weak link. You've got 10 gauge wire going between each of the different sub battery packs within the larger battery packs. So that's been a problem, obviously. And if we double these things up, like this is actually one of the larger batteries, and then this would be one of the smaller batteries, but they're, you know, same voltage, different current ratings. But, you know, if you double them up, you're basically doubling up 10 gauge wires, so that's going to theoretically give you a lot more potential current flow. And we are talking about a lot of power. We're talking about, you know, well over 10,000 watts. We've hit over 20,000 watts in testing peak. So, you know, it's a lot of power, and that's a lot of power for 10 gauge wire to handle. So this is the old one, by the way. So you can see the singles. So basically the way these would work is you would take your, you know, battery connector, and actually it would end up going like this, and you would bridge these two. So it would basically tie them in series. And now, this was designed in a way where you can't physically plug it into a single one of these sort of bus bars, because that would cause a short, obviously. So we don't have that problem. Now with this one, we're going to have 2 sets, obviously, in each one. So let's go ahead and take one out. Let's start marking these up. Basically, we're going to hold these in the same way that these are held in. So there are, if you look close, you can see that there are screws kind of poking through. They're actually socket-head cap screws. In fact, you know, there's the underside. You can see them in there. So they stick through, and, you know, they just thread into it. But basically, these are centered. Now, the difference is, obviously, all 5 of these little bus bar sections are identical. These are kind of all had to be different because, again, we had the ESC in here next to the battery pack. Now it's now down next to the motor, so that's not an issue. So this is, in a way, simpler. And in a way, we'll have higher current capability, obviously, because we're doubling them up. But it also makes it easier to machine because, you know, we can do all 5 at once. So let's take one of these out. No, we took 2 out. All right. They should all be exactly pretty much the same in terms of dimension. So let's double check here. Let's go zero it out. Let's do, it's supposed to be 1-inch wide bus bars. So these are my cheap calipers, which aren't the most repeatable things in the world, but for this they're more than accurate enough. So let's say this should be 1 inch in this dimension, and it is exactly 1 inch, as you can see. And then in this dimension, it's around 1.3, if I remember correctly. No, 1.23, 1.236. Let's make sure. So again, this one should be the same this way. Should be pretty darn close, right on the money. And then the other one was 1.236. This is 1.234. So let's call it 1.235 on average. You know, as long as we get close enough for these. So we're just going to take one of these, and we're going to mark up one of these, and we'll stack them all in the mill and just drill the center hole first for all of them. So let's go ahead and mark the center dimension this way. If it's exactly 1 inch, that means we need to set, and this is exactly why I'm using these cheapo calipers. These are actually the first digital calipers I ever bought. Harbor Freight Specials. So let's get down to roughly 0.500, or as close as we can reasonably get. I'd rather be over than under, and that reason will be apparent here shortly. Come on, there we go. Alright, so it says we're half thou over. I'm not necessarily buying that, but basically all we're trying to do is we're trying to mark the center, and we do it from both sides, you know, put a little scratch in, and there you go. You can't, I don't know if you can see that. You know what, let me just reach under the camera here. Let's do it again, but let's that's not really doing us a whole lot of good, is it? That Sharpie's not so great. Let's try another Sharpie. Okay, let's try this one. Marginally better. Okay, so yeah, this way I don't have to wait for the Dicom to dry. Alright, so we're still at half, so let's go ahead and mark it again with our scribe. We just want to be approximately in the middle. So I'm not really sure if that's showing up on camera. My monitor screen obviously here is pretty small, but I'm going to assume that you can see that. Alright, so we had, what, 1.25 is what we're averaging, so 1.25 inches on the width of these things. This one's a little bit bigger. This is 1 point. No, not even 1.25 inches. This one's under that. 1.233, 1.235. So let's say roughly, I didn't want to screw that up. I actually had to go out and get a calculator. My apologies. I am dumber than I look. That is true. So it's 0.617 is where we want to be on that mark. So let's go ahead and find 0.617. And let's come down. 0.617. All right. 0.165. It's going to be fine because we're, not that hypercritical. We're just cutting into high density polyethylene. So there's room to play here. This stuff does have a certain flexibility. So yeah, we're close enough to centered. So there is our center mark, which you can see fairly well, I guess. Let me go ahead and get a center punch. We'll center punch it, and I'll meet you guys over at the mill. So here's our setup at the mill. We have pieces of 1/4 inch high-speed steel tooling at the bottom to use as parallels. It's a good fit for these guys. Here's our stack of little copper plates. They fit perfectly in here. Let's start snugging these up a little bit. We don't want to get them tight just yet. And then we'll take a 90-degree piece here and just get them all nice and lined up. This isn't like super ultra high precision. It just has to be good enough. There are cases where good enough is good enough, and this is one of those cases. All right, let's horse that down. So we're going to drill through all of these at once, but we're not. Hey, look at that. There's some lift going on at the bottom. That's not good. All right, now they're all clamped. No, they're not clamped. Look at that. All right, that's I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's mildly annoying. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take out our parallels. That's plenty tight in there. This vise is horsed down, and let's just focus on doing these three then, I guess. These will be the three in the middle, I suppose. So let's go ahead and line it up on our center drill. I'm using a carbide center drill. I stopped using the cheap Chinese ones once I had a couple of tips break off. These aren't that expensive, not for the quality pieces. It's certainly worth the investment. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this into place here. Let's take a look. Okay, we're good on this axis, and I'm going to call us good on the other axis too. Let's go ahead and see where we end up. I'd say that's right on the money. You can see that copper really gums up here pretty bad. I really don't like working with copper. It's not fun to machine. It gets all sticky. Alright, so what I'm using for a drill is actually a spotting drill because it's the closest thing I have to the exact right tap size. It's within a couple thou. I don't have a 5mm tap drill, but I do have an assortment of these guys, and these are extremely high quality. I'm doing the peck method so I don't get these big, long, stringy chips. All right, there you go. There's our center 3 pieces drilled. The way I'm going to handle the remaining 2 is I'm just going to stack them up. I'm still going to use the same basic setup, but since we know that this particular vise, I don't feel like taking my toolmaker's vise out and setting it up just for drilling holes. So with this particular vise,
we know that we get a stack of 3 pretty good, but you know, any more than that, not so good. All right, there's one thing I actually forgot to do. I should have done this ahead of time, but I really meant to use these holes as templates to mark the holes we need to drill through here, through the piece of plastic. So what I'm going to do, since they all should be more or less in the same place, I've got the same spotting, drilling my hand drill, because this will function as a guide, and this is more than accurate enough. Sounds to me like the battery kind of needs a charge, huh? Alright, done. By the way, that's the kind of stuff that just completely wrecks your shoulder, doing things like that by hand. Alright, let's get back to tapping. Tappy tap. In fact, I remember that after doing my first 2 taps. You know what, just for grins, see how she does on plastic. Oh, wow, that's a thing of beauty. Super quick, super fast. I will confess, this is not the Noga branded tool. This is a knockoff. It was relatively cheap, but it's sharp and it's well made, and I'm rather happy with the purchase. That's all you really need to do. Occasionally blow out a chip, I guess. Now these holes are obviously not going to be big enough yet because they're the tap drill size. I'll probably make these 5.5 mil. Give us a 0.5 millimeter of playroom. If I miss by more than that, I shouldn't be doing this at all. Alright, so this one's tapped. Next. I know I said I'd do this off camera, but we're all here. We're all friends. We have a lot to talk about. Been a while. All that happy stuff. Alright. Let's check our positioning. It seems like I'm always going the wrong way. It's the story of my life, man. Story of my life. This makes it so much easier. This tap follower, I'm not super thrilled with it. It actually has a lot of play. You can see it up top. But still works well enough where I haven't broken a tap yet. I say that now, just wait. Hey, hold my beer. Alright, let's get this one out. Doing a real nice job. I do like these spiral fluted taps better than the plug type taps that you get at your local big box, you know, Home Depot, Lowe's. They seem to cut better, faster, and just generally a substantial improvement. Finally, I get to go the other way, because it's actually starting to butt up against the camera mount here. Alright, that's pretty good. So there we go. So all 5 are drilled, tapped. You're looking at the ugly side of that one. Don't look at the ugly side of that one. Look at the pretty side of that one. And I'm going to drill these out to 5.5 mil, and I'll meet you over at the desk, and we'll try to assemble it and see how it goes together. Alright, so here we are back at the desk with a bunch of cap screws and washers. Let's check it out. Let's see how they fit. It should be pretty straightforward. I think these screws are going to stick out just a little bit, which, you know, I'm fine with that. It's barely anything. That should look pretty good. We're going to put our screwed up one over on the end here if we have to remake it. Whoa, why is that so stiff? Nice thing is we can now use these to push them back out. For whatever reason, this one seems to be binding in here. Is it because there's a burr here somewhere? Or is it just because I didn't round the corner enough? I don't quite understand what's going on here. But I don't want to force it. So let's stick it in the other side. Raise your hand if you've ever said that before. Alright, that one seems to fit there.
All right, let's get our washer. Let's get our cap screw. If I was really motivated, I suppose I could countersink these things and make it all. But, you know, the reality is, for what we're doing, it simply does not matter. All right, that one holds just fine. Like I say, there's plenty of thread there, really. Should be just fine. Here's our next one. Let's go ahead and... Okay. Here's the next one. Now the game plan is that the batteries will not be on this side, so in other words, you won't plug them in like this. You will actually be plugging them in like this. And the reason for that is I wanted the insulation here, plus I was thinking about what the most efficient way is to get the power to the other side. Here for the full battery pack, we go through the main switch, the 1400 amp switch, and you know the cables to the ESC. And it dawned on me it would just be easier to take a battery lug, take a 6mm brass bolt, which I have a bunch of here, and just bolt them right to this surface and this surface here. And that should work out the best. So the next thing we have to do is we're going to have to mark all of these, specifically between this plate and this plate, this plate, this plate, this plate, this plate, and this plate, and this plate, because that's where the EC5 connectors are going to go. So towards that end, what we need to do is we're going to take, again, the cheaper caliper, and we're going to set this up to millimeters and zero it out. See, this one's not even that repeatable. Like, you can knock it out pretty easily. Let's re-zero it. It's all over the place. Whatever. Point is, the spacing on an EC5 connector, which is what these guys are over here, is 10.1 millimeters. So we don't have to be that precise because there is some play in those connectors. But we want to be, you know, at least fairly close. So I need to think about what the best way to lay this thing out is. That's roughly 10, it's 10.11. No, it's 10.10 is where it ended up. So, you know, plus there's the accuracy issue. So I could eyeball this. I could, I don't know. I could measure the gap. Let's do that. Let's take a look. Let's see if the gap between the plates, because these are slightly proud of this surface, and the reason for that is, again, you know, the idea of the battery flange. Once these things are tightened down, they're going to be maybe, you know, it's going to be less than 0.5 millimeter. But let's take a look at this, and this one just dead nuts repeats every time. So let's see here. So we are roughly 3, well, if I push it, it's 3 millimeters. 2.8. It all depends where. I don't know. I may just eyeball this and call that good enough. At which point, of course, we're going to have to number these plates so they go back into the same spot every time. I think that might just be the easiest thing to do, frankly, because we're going to discreetly drill all those holes, and it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 holes we're going to have to drill. And we're going to have to mark 16 holes. So, I know you guys might not be able to see it, but I am going to try to keep them relatively close to centered. You know what? I'm not liking this plan either. Let me think this through here. In fact, I'm going to think it through and get right back to you. Alright, so I figured out how I'm going to do this. If I take, this takes into account all the gaps and gets us close enough, at least within 1/10 of a millimeter, which I assume there's going to be at least that much play within each EC5 connector anyway. So basically, if I preset this thing to 3.75 millimeters, which is actually, I reset it, but let's see. Okay, and of course it did not repeat, but 3.75 millimeters. Let's go ahead and zero this out. Close enough. These are my cheap scribing calipers. Okay. All right. And I'm just going to do a 3.75 millimeter square mark. So by that I mean, if we take that one out, if I just use these calipers to scribe, line here, and then we'll do it from the other side too. So each one of these pins is going to be 3.75 millimeters from both sides. That should get us where we want to be. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of those. I'm going to drill them. I'm going to drill them for these male connectors, these male EC5 connectors, and I'm going to solder them in place. So let me go ahead and drill those holes, and let's go ahead and solder them, see how it turns out.